In the forests of western Thailand, there is a place that no longer appears on any map. No signs point the way. No records confirm it ever existed. Yet those who live nearby still avoid the area after sunset. They say the ground there listens. They say some graves were never meant to hold the dead. This is not a story meant to scare you quickly. It is a story meant to stay with you long after the light is turned off. This is the Nameless Grave. Chapter 1. The Cemetery That Disappeared. On the far western edge of Kanchanaburi Province, where the jungle thickens into an endless wall of twisted roots and towering trees, there is a stretch of land that refuses to be remembered. Roads leading toward it fade into dirt, then into nothing at all. Even satellite maps hesitate, blurring that area as if the earth itself has chosen to hide what lies beneath. Decades ago, this land was known as Ban Freya Cemetery. Today, its name no longer exists in government archives. No land deeds, no religious records, no mention in temple registries. Officials who are asked about it often respond with confusion, or with silence that lingers too long to be natural. But the villagers remember. They remember because no one who truly saw Ban Freya ever forgot it. The forest surrounding the cemetery feels wrong even in daylight. The air is heavier there, damp and sour, as if the soil itself is rotting. Insects grow quiet without warning. Birds refuse to perch on the trees closest to the old burial ground. Hunters say their compasses spin uselessly when they wander too near, and phones lose signal as though something unseen is pressing down on the air. At night, no one goes there willingly. Those who have dared to pass near the forest after sunset speak of a sound that does not belong to the living world, a single temple bell, ringing slowly beneath the ground. The sound does not echo outward. It feels as though it rises directly into the bones of anyone who hears it, vibrating inside the chest, inside the skull. Dong, dong. Each strike spaced too evenly, as if something buried deep below is patiently counting time. At the center of what was once Ban Freya Cemetery lies a low mound of earth. No headstone marks it, no offerings are ever left. Grass refuses to grow fully over it. And even during the harsh dry season, when the surrounding land cracks and turns to dust, this mound remains unnaturally damp. The soil is always cold to the touch. Villagers call it the Nameless Grave. No one remembers who was buried there. Some insist that no funeral was ever held. Others claim the grave appeared overnight, as if the earth itself had pushed something up and then tried to hide it again. What everyone agrees on is this: the grave does not feel like a place of rest. Those who stand near it for too long report a strange sensation, like being watched from below. Like unseen fingers brushing against the soles of their feet. Like breath rising slowly through layers of soil, stopping just short of breaking the surface. The elders warn their children never to step onto that ground. Some places, they say, are not meant to remember names. And some graves, they whisper, were never made to hold the dead. Chapter 2. The man who guarded the dead. Before Ban Freya Cemetery vanished from maps and memory, before fear hollowed out the village, there was a man who walked among the graves every night. No one ever learned his name. He arrived without introduction, without family, without history. One day, a small wooden shack stood at the edge of the cemetery, and the man was already living inside it, as though he had always been there. When villagers asked the local monks who he was, the monks only said that the position of caretaker had been filled. No documents were signed, no blessings were performed. The man was simply there. By daylight, he was rarely seen. His shack remained sealed from morning until dusk. Its door closed tight even in the suffocating heat. Smoke never rose from its roof. No footsteps were heard from within. It was as if the man did not exist until the sun began to fall. But at night, he emerged. Villagers watching from a distance saw him move slowly through the cemetery, carrying an old oil lamp whose flame burned low and steady, never flickering even when the wind picked up. In his other hand, he held a rusted knife, its blade dark with age. He walked between the graves as though following paths no one else could see, stopping often to murmur words under his breath. The words were not Thai. Some monks later said the language sounded like ancient Pali, used only in the oldest funerary chants meant not to comfort the dead, but to bind them. Dogs did not bark when he passed. They whined, pressed their bodies low to the ground, and turned their faces away. Chickens refused to roost near the cemetery fence. Even insects seemed to retreat from his presence, leaving the air around him unnaturally still. Children noticed things adults tried to ignore. They whispered that the caretaker's feet never made sound on the dirt, that moonlight slipped past him without leaving a shadow, that when he stopped walking, it felt as though the night itself was holding its breath. Once, a boy followed him to the edge of the cemetery and watched as the man stood before a grave. Head tilted slightly, listening. Listening to what? The boy could not tell. The next day, the boy fell ill with a fever so intense he screamed at shadows crawling along the walls. He survived, but he never went near the cemetery again. When villagers finally gathered the courage to speak to the caretaker directly, they found his eyes unsettling. Not hostile, not angry. Just empty, as if he were not truly looking at the living. When asked why he worked there alone, he answered calmly, "Someone must stay awake." When asked what he guarded the cemetery from, he paused for a long moment before replying, "From opening." No one questioned him after that, because deep down, they already knew. Ban Freya was not a place meant to be watched over. It was a place meant to be kept closed.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Grave That Should Not Exist. The grave appeared without warning. There was no funeral procession, no chanting monks, no white cloths fluttering in the wind. No one in Ban Freya had died in weeks. The village elders knew every birth and every passing by heart. Yet on that morning, something new stood at the center of the cemetery, silent proof that the land itself had acted without permission. It was a small mound of earth, freshly formed. The soil was dark and heavy, clinging together as if still wet from rain, though the sky had been clear for days. No wooden marker stood at its head. No stone bore a name. There were no incense sticks. No offerings of flowers or rice. Not even footprints leading to or away from it. It was simply there. Villagers gathered at the cemetery's edge, whispering among themselves. Some insisted it must be a prank. Others swore they would have heard digging during the night. But those who lived closest to Ban Freya all agreed on one thing. The night had been unnaturally quiet. No dogs barked. No frogs sang. The caretaker arrived just before dusk. He stood before the grave, holding his oil lamp close, its dull light sliding across the damp soil. For a long time, he did not move. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid, as though he were bracing himself against something unseen. Then he did something that unsettled everyone watching. He knelt. He pressed his palm flat against the mound, ignoring the mud soaking into his skin, and lowered his head until his forehead nearly touched the earth. His lips moved, forming words too soft to hear, but the rhythm of his voice suggested neither prayer nor comfort. It sounded like negotiation. One villager later swore that the ground shifted beneath the caretaker's hand, just slightly, as if responding. When the caretaker finally stood, his face had lost what little color it possessed. He turned to the onlookers and met their gazes one by one, his eyes sharp with a fear he did not bother to hide. "Do not touch this grave," he said. His voice was firm, final. A man asked who had been buried there. The caretaker hesitated, just for a breath, before answering, "No one you would recognize." Another villager demanded to know who had given permission for the burial. The caretaker's grip tightened around the lamp. This ground did. That night, the wind returned. The forest groaned and shifted, branches scraping together like bone against bone. From the village, people swore they could hear a faint sound rising from the cemetery, not quite a voice. Not quite a cry, but something caught halfway between. Something testing the air. And beneath the nameless mound, the earth remained wet and cold, as though it had never truly closed. Chapter 4. The Crying Beneath the Soil. The first night after the grave appeared, no one slept well. It began shortly after midnight, when the village was wrapped in darkness and the jungle settled into its usual chorus of insects. One by one, those sounds faded, until the silence became so complete it felt unnatural. Then the crying began. At first, it was faint, so faint that many mistook it for the wind slipping through bamboo or the distant wail of an animal caught in a trap. But the sound carried something unmistakably human, a broken rhythm of breath. A trembling weakness that did not belong to any beast of the forest. It came from the direction of the cemetery. The crying rose slowly, then fell, as if the voice were struggling for air. Some said it sounded like a child. Others swore it was the voice of a grown person forcing themselves to cry softly, trying not to be heard. What frightened them most was not the sound itself. It was the words hidden inside it. Between the sobs, villagers heard their names. Not shouted, not screamed. Whispered. A woman woke to hear her childhood nickname spoken with aching familiarity. An old man heard the name his dead wife used only in private. A mother felt her skin go cold when the voice called out to her using the name she had chosen for her unborn child decades earlier, a name no one else had ever known. By dawn, fear had soaked into the village like rot into wood. The elders gathered and spoke of Phai Tai Hong, spirits of those who had died violently or unjustly, their souls trapped between worlds. Such spirits were said to cling to the earth, calling to the living, seeking warmth, seeking release. But there was something wrong. Phai Tai Hong were restless, angry, their cries were wild and desperate. This voice was patient. That evening, villagers confronted the caretaker. They found him already standing at the edge of the cemetery, oil lamp in hand, staring toward the nameless grave. His face was drawn tight, eyes sunken as though he had not slept in days. "You hear it too," one man said. The caretaker did not turn. "Yes," he replied. A woman begged him to let the monks cleanse the grave. Another demanded they dig it up and see what lay beneath. At that, the caretaker finally faced them. His expression was unlike anything they had seen before, not anger, not fear, but something closer to resignation. "If you open it," he said quietly, "it will learn the way back." Someone asked what it was. The caretaker hesitated, just long enough for the crying to rise again from beneath the ground. Louder now, closer, pressing against the surface of the world. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Some things are buried," he said, "not because they're dead." The crying stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse. But because they must not be allowed to finish becoming. That night, no one went near Ban Freya. But long after the lamps were extinguished, many swore they felt vibrations beneath their homes, slow, deliberate movements, as if something deep below the village was learning how to listen.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Night the Moon Turned Red. The night the moon turned red, Ban Freya understood that whatever lay beneath the nameless grave was no longer content to remain unheard. It was the 7th night after the crying began. By dusk, the air itself felt wrong, thick, pressing against the skin, heavy with the scent of wet earth though no rain had fallen. Clouds slid across the sky in slow, uneven patterns, parting just enough for the moon to rise. When it did, its light was dim and stained, tinted the deep color of dried blood. The elders shut their doors early. Animals fled the forest edge. Even insects abandoned their songs, leaving the village suspended in an unnatural hush. Oil lamps flickered violently, their flames bending away from the cemetery as though repelled by something unseen. Shortly before midnight, someone screamed. Villagers rushed outside and saw the caretaker running through Ban Freya Cemetery. His oil lamp was unlit, swinging wildly at his side. In his other hand, he clutched the rusted knife, its blade catching flashes of moonlight as he staggered between the graves. He was shouting, not words, but broken sounds, raw and animal, as if responding to voices only he could hear. He stopped at the nameless grave. Those watching from afar saw him drop to his knees, clawing at the damp soil with his bare hands. He pressed his forehead to the ground, screaming now, begging, arguing, his voice cracking as though he were bargaining for something he had already lost. The earth trembled. Not violently, not enough to knock anyone down. Just enough to be felt. A low vibration rolled through the ground, deep and slow, like the shifting of something enormous beneath layers of soil. The caretaker screamed louder, slamming his knife into the earth again and again, as if trying to pin the ground shut. Then the sound came. A scream, but not from above. It rose from beneath the grave, sharp and piercing, filled with pain and fury and triumph all at once. The villagers clapped their hands over their ears as the sound tore through the night, echoing unnaturally, stretching far longer than any human breath could sustain. The caretaker collapsed. The scream stopped. When dawn finally broke, the cemetery was silent. Villagers approached cautiously, hearts pounding, and found the caretaker lying face down near the nameless grave. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, limbs stiff, fingers buried deep into the mud. His eyes were open. His mouth was frozen wide, stretched beyond what should have been possible, as if he had died trying to expel something that refused to leave his throat. When they turned his body over, soil poured from his mouth. There were no wounds, no blood, only his hands, his fingernails shattered, torn away completely, packed with roots and wet earth. A senior monk who arrived later looked upon the body and whispered a single sentence that none would forget. He failed to keep the door closed. Behind them, the nameless grave had collapsed inward, just slightly, as though something beneath it had shifted position, as though it had finally realized. The keeper was no longer standing. Chapter 6. A death without a cause. At first glance, the caretaker's death made no sense. There were no cuts on his skin, no bruises, no broken bones that could explain the way his body had twisted itself into that final, unnatural position. The knife lay a short distance from his hand, untouched, its blade clean. Nothing in the scene suggested a struggle with another human being. And yet, everyone who looked at him knew instinctively that this was not a peaceful death. The villagers gathered at a careful distance, whispering among themselves. Some claimed he must have suffered a sudden illness. Others suggested his heart had simply stopped from fear. But no one could ignore the state of his hands. His fingernails were gone. Not torn cleanly, but shattered, split and broken, bent backward as if forced beyond their limits. Beneath them, clumps of wet soil and fibrous roots were embedded deep into the flesh of his fingers, as though he had been digging with frantic desperation until his body could no longer obey him. It looked less like a man trying to escape, and more like someone trying to hold something down. A senior monk from a nearby temple was called to examine the body. He arrived just before noon, carrying no holy water, no incense. He circled the corpse slowly, eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight in thought. When he knelt beside the caretaker, he did not touch him. Instead, the monk placed his palm just above the man's chest, hovering there, as if sensing something invisible. His expression darkened. This man did not die from the outside, the monk said quietly. He was emptied. The villagers demanded an explanation, but the monk only shook his head. He looked toward the nameless grave, then back at the body, and finally up at the sky, as though measuring something unseen. He stayed awake for too long, the monk said at last. When the living stand between worlds, something always grows tired first. Someone asked whether the caretaker had been cursed. The monk answered slowly, choosing his words with care. He was not cursed, he said, he was assigned. The villagers did not understand, but dread settled deeper into their bones. As preparations were made for burial, something else became clear. The caretaker's face, once blank and distant, had changed. His expression was no longer frozen in terror. It was strained. As if, even in death, he were still resisting an unbearable pressure. As if his role had not yet ended. That night, before his body was moved, several villagers swore they saw his fingers twitch slightly, scraping against the dirt. And far beneath Ban Freya Cemetery, the soil shifted once more, slowly, patiently, like something adjusting itself after a long wait. Because a door had been left unattended. And something had noticed.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. A burial without prayers. The burial took place at dusk. No temple bells rang, no monks chanted sutras, there was no holy water, no incense smoke curling toward the sky. The senior monk who had examined the body refused to perform the rites, claiming that any formal blessing would draw attention. Attention, he would not say from whom. The villagers buried the caretaker where he had fallen, on the edge of Ban Freya Cemetery, close enough to the Nameless Grave that the two mounds seemed to lean toward each other. No marker was placed, no name was spoken aloud. The earth was packed down quickly, unevenly, as though everyone feared lingering too long. As the last shovel of soil fell, the air grew noticeably colder. A woman later swore she heard breathing, not from any living person, but from beneath the ground. Slow, measured breaths, rising and falling with the patience of something that had learned how to wait. When night came, no one remained near the cemetery. But Ban Freya did not rest. Just after midnight, a dull sound rolled through the earth, soft, heavy, unmistakable. It was followed by another, then another, each separated by long pauses. Not blows, not digging, shifting. By dawn, the villagers returned. What they found made several of them retch. The soil above the caretaker's grave had collapsed inward, forming a shallow depression, as though something beneath it had pulled downward with deliberate force. Beside it, the Nameless Grave had also changed. Its mound was lower now, its surface cracked, damp soil seeping through fresh fissures. Between the two graves, thin lines had appeared in the dirt. Marks. Dragged paths, shallow and uneven, as if something had moved back and forth between them during the night. The elders argued about what to do next. Some demanded the graves be separated, others that the cemetery be sealed entirely. One man suggested burning the area to the ground. The senior monk arrived again, his face grim. "You have already completed the exchange," he said quietly. When pressed to explain, he pointed to the caretaker's grave. "He stood watch while he lived," the monk said. "Now he stands watch below." Someone asked whether the Nameless Grave had been satisfied. The monk did not answer immediately. He knelt, placed his hand against the cold earth between the two mounds, and closed his eyes. "No," he said at last. "It has merely accepted the change." That night, villagers reported new sounds, footsteps circling their homes, stopping just outside doors. Lamps flickered when no wind stirred. Children woke screaming, claiming a man stood at the foot of their beds, his face hidden in shadow, his mouth moving silently as if counting. And beneath Ban Freya Cemetery, two graves rested side by side. One unnamed, one newly claimed, neither of them empty. Chapter 8. Handprints from below. The handprints appeared at dawn. They were not there the night before. Of that, everyone was certain. Several villagers had stayed awake until nearly morning, too afraid to sleep, watching the cemetery from a distance. The ground had been still then, silent, unbroken. But when the first light of day reached Ban Freya, the earth told a different story. Across the surface of the Nameless Grave and the caretaker's mound, impressions had formed in the damp soil. They were unmistakable, human handprints, pressed upward from beneath, as though someone had reached toward the surface and stopped just short of breaking through. The fingers were long and thin, too thin, the joints bent at angles that no living hand should bend. The palms were stretched wide, leaving deep grooves in the mud, each line sharp and deliberate. These were not the marks of struggle. They were tests. Villagers gathered around the graves, whispering prayers under their breath. Some covered their mouths, fighting nausea. Others backed away slowly, unable to look for long without feeling a pressure build behind their eyes. A child stepped forward before anyone could stop him. He stared at the handprints in silence, his face draining of color. Then he screamed, not in fear, but in recognition. "It's wrong," he cried. "It's not finished." He collapsed moments later, his body convulsing as if seized by a sudden fever. By nightfall, his skin burned hot to the touch. His eyes rolled back, and his lips moved endlessly, murmuring words no one could understand. The elders sent for monks. They arrived with talismans and holy water. But the moment they stepped onto the cemetery grounds, their chants faltered, incense refused to burn, prayer beads slipped from shaking hands. One monk turned pale and whispered that the ground felt hollow, as though something vast had been removed. That night, the child died. Just before his final breath, he opened his eyes and spoke clearly for the first time since falling ill. "It's learning," he said. "How to reach up." After his death, The handprints began to fade, but not disappear. The soil dried over them, sealing the shapes beneath the surface, preserving their outline like a memory pressed into the land itself. And with their appearance came something else. People began waking to the sensation of pressure on their chests, as if unseen hands were resting there, measuring the shape of their bodies. Doors were found ajar in the mornings, footprints leading nowhere, food spoiled overnight, coated in damp soil though it had never touched the ground. Most disturbing of all were the dreams. Villagers dreamed of standing waist deep in earth, unable to move, while something below gently wrapped its fingers around their ankles, patient, curious, and unafraid. Because beneath Ban Freya Cemetery, the thing that had once been sealed was no longer merely listening. It was reaching.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The first man WHO challenged it. Fear spread through Ban Freya like a sickness, but not everyone accepted it. There was a man named Samchai who laughed at the stories. He was known for his temper and his drinking, a man who believed fear was a weakness invented by those who could not face reality. When others spoke of handprints rising from the earth and children dying of unexplained fevers, Samchai spat on the ground and called them fools. Graves are for the dead, he said. If something is buried, it stays buried. That night, he drank more than usual. As the village lamps dimmed and doors were barred, Samchai staggered toward the cemetery, a bottle still clutched in his hand. Several villagers saw him go. None followed. They watched in silence as his figure disappeared into the trees, swallowed by darkness. The jungle did not resist him. No wind rose, no insects cried out, even the leaves seemed to part willingly as he walked. Later, some claimed they heard his laughter echo faintly from Ban Freya, short, sharp bursts that ended too suddenly, as though something had placed a hand over his mouth. Morning came. Samchai did not return. When villagers finally gathered the courage to search the cemetery, they found him sitting atop the nameless grave. He sat upright, legs crossed, bottle still resting loosely in his fingers. At first glance, he appeared unharmed, almost peaceful, but as they drew closer, the truth became unbearable. His head was twisted completely backward. Not broken, turned. The skin of his neck was stretched but unbroken. The muscles beneath pulled into shapes no living body could achieve. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ground behind him, pupils clouded and unseeing. His mouth was fixed in a crooked smile, frozen halfway between laughter and agony. Pressed firmly against his chest was a single handprint. It was darker than the others, deeper. The fingers sank into his flesh as though his body had been soft clay when the hand touched him. The imprint did not fade when wiped. It did not dry. It remained wet. The monks refused to approach the body. This was not punishment, one whispered. It was demonstration. No one moved Samchai's corpse until sunset. When they finally did, they found the soil beneath him disturbed, pressed down hard, as though the grave itself had risen to meet his weight. That night, the crying returned. But it no longer sounded distant. It came from directly beneath the village, strong and steady, filled not with pain, but with certainty. Because something had finally learned what happened when the living dared to stand on its door. Chapter 10. When the grave was opened. The decision to open the nameless grave was not made lightly. Samchai's death shattered what little denial remained in Ban Freya. Fear was no longer a rumor or a whisper passed between doors at night. It was a presence that followed people in daylight, that breathed down their necks even when they prayed. Children refused to leave their homes. Adults spoke in hushed voices, careful not to let certain words fully form. After 3 nights without sleep, the elders sent for a young monk from a distant temple. Unlike the senior monks, he did not avert his gaze when told what had happened. He listened without interruption, his face calm, his hands folded neatly in his robes. When the story ended, he nodded once. "If it is a seal," he said, "then it must be understood." At dawn, he entered Ban Freya Cemetery alone. Villagers watched from the tree line as he approached the nameless grave. He placed talismans at the 4 corners of the mound, chanting softly, his voice steady despite the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. The jungle seemed to lean closer, branches creaking as if listening. When he began to dig, the soil yielded too easily. It was soft and cold, clinging to his hands like wet clay. There was no resistance, no roots, no stones, just layers of earth that seemed already loosened, as though something beneath had been turning slowly for years. Less than a meter down, the monk stopped. There was no coffin, no bones, no remains of any kind. The hole opened into a hollow space, and from within it came a faint, steady current of air, warm, damp, and unmistakably alive. The monk lowered a lamp. Its light revealed torn fragments of ancient talismans scattered along the walls, their inscriptions scratched out from the inside. A small temple bell lay cracked in half, its metal corroded as though it had been exposed to breath rather than soil. And beneath them, a tunnel. It descended at an unnatural angle, smooth in places, scraped raw in others, as if something had passed through repeatedly. Hand and body marks lined the walls, pressed deep, overlapping, layered with time. This was not a grave. It was a passage. The monk staggered back, his chant breaking apart into gasps. He scrambled out of the hole, his composure finally shattered, eyes wide with understanding and horror. This was never meant to hold the dead, he whispered. The ground beneath him shuddered slightly, as though in response. The monk fled the cemetery without another word, leaving his talisman scattered in the dirt. Behind him, the hole began to collapse inward on its own, soil sliding back into place with deliberate slowness. By nightfall, the nameless grave looked almost untouched. Almost. But everyone in Ban Freya now understood the truth. Whatever had been sealed beneath the earth had not been buried. It had been contained. And containment, once broken, could never truly be restored.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Confession That Should Not Be Spoken. The young monk did not return to the temple. Instead, he locked himself inside an abandoned spirit house on the edge of the forest. A place long avoided even by villagers who no longer believed in old superstitions. For 3 days, he remained there alone. No chanting was heard, no incense burned, only silence, thick and suffocating, hung around the small wooden structure. On the 4th night, he came back. Those who saw him barely recognized the man who had entered the cemetery. His robes hung loose on his frame, stained with dirt and sweat. His eyes were sunken, ringed with dark shadows, as if he had not slept since the grave was opened. He smelled of earth and something older, something like damp stone left too long in the dark. He gathered the elders and spoke without greeting. What lies beneath Ban Freya, he said, was once human. No one interrupted him. Long ago, according to the monk, the land had been used not as a cemetery, but as a boundary, a place where monks practiced forbidden rites meant to trap dangerous spirits, those who could not be destroyed, only restrained. The rituals were meant to turn a living person into a vessel, a guardian bound between death and life, tasked with holding the seal in place. The transformation was not instant. The body was buried alive, sealed with talismans, bells, and chants designed to slow the change. As long as the guardian remained conscious, aware, the seal held. When the mind breaks, the monk whispered, the door loosens. The nameless grave marked the last of these vessels. The caretaker had not been chosen by chance. He had been drawn there, called, because the seal required a replacement. Someone to listen, someone to stand watch while the thing beneath completed its slow awakening. The caretaker's death had not been an attack. It had been a handover. When someone asked whether the seal could be repaired, the monk's hands began to shake. There is no repairing this, he said, only delay. Someone else demanded to know what would happen next. The monk looked toward the forest, his face pale. It will seek another watcher, he said, someone who hears it, someone who stays. That night, the monk removed his robes. By dawn, he was gone. And in Ban Freya, more villagers began to notice the same thing the caretaker once had. That sleep came harder each night. That silence felt heavier. That sometimes, when standing very still, they could hear breathing beneath their feet. Chapter 12. The monk Who could not look away. The monk's disappearance was not discovered immediately. At first, The villagers assumed he had returned to his temple in silence, unwilling to remain near Ban Freya any longer. After all, fear had already driven many to distance themselves from the cemetery. No one wished to follow his path too closely. But 3 days passed. Then 4. No word came from any temple. No monk claimed to have seen him. His name did not appear in any registry. It was as if, the moment he removed his robes, the world had agreed to forget him. On the 5th day, a hunter found him. He was hanging from a tree deep in the forest, far from the village paths, where the canopy grew thick and the light barely reached the ground. His body swayed gently, though there was no wind. The rope around his neck was crude, hastily made from twisted vines, yet tied with deliberate precision. What unsettled the hunter most was not the body itself. It was the ground beneath it. The soil below the monk's feet was compressed, sunken inward, as though something heavy had stood there for a long time, listening. When the villagers arrived, they noticed marks on the tree trunk, scratches, long, shallow lines carved into the bark, uneven and frantic. The monk's fingernails were broken, bloodied, his hands torn raw. He had not died quietly. Etched into the tree, written again and again in desperate repetition, were the same words. He has found a new keeper. Some letters were backward, others were barely legible, smeared by blood and dirt, but the message was clear enough that no one asked what it meant. That night, the dreams began to change. Before, villagers dreamed of being buried, of hands reaching up from the soil. Now they dreamed of standing watch, motionless, sleepless, while something enormous shifted behind them, breathing steadily, patiently. Several people woke to find dirt beneath their fingernails. One man awoke standing outside his home, barefoot, facing the direction of Ban Freya Cemetery, his mind blank, his body trembling as if he had walked there in his sleep. Most disturbing of all were the whispers. Not cries anymore. Instructions. Soft, calm, endlessly patient voices speaking just beyond the edge of hearing, guiding thoughts, shaping attention, pulling certain minds closer while leaving others untouched. The elders understood then. The thing beneath Ban Freya was no longer testing. It was choosing. And somewhere among the living, the next watcher had already begun to listen.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Village That Walked Away. Ban Freya did not empty all at once. At first, it happened quietly. One family left before dawn, loading their belongings onto a cart without explanation. Another followed 2 days later, abandoning fields that had fed them for generations. No farewells were spoken, no questions were asked. Everyone understood why. Fear had settled too deep into the soil to be argued with. Within a week, the village began to hollow out. Houses stood open, doors creaking in the wind. Offerings were left untouched on spirit shelves. Food rotting beneath the sun. Dogs wandered freely, confused, whining at night as if searching for owners who would never return. Government officials arrived briefly, accompanied by soldiers who refused to stay past sunset. They walked the perimeter of the forest, marked the area on their maps, and spoke in low voices. By the next morning, Ban Freya Cemetery was removed from all records. Roads leading to the village were quietly rerouted. The forest was declared restricted land. The elders were the last to leave. They gathered one final time near the cemetery's edge, staring at the place where so many had been buried, where something far worse had been contained. No prayers were offered. They had learned by now that words carried weight here. As they turned to go, one of the elders stopped. He frowned, counting heads. Someone was missing. A man named Chai, quiet, withdrawn, known for insomnia since the monk's death. He had complained of hearing breathing beneath his floorboards, of feeling compelled to walk at night. They had assumed fear had driven him mad. They found his house empty. The bed was untouched. His belongings remained neatly arranged. But the back door stood open, leading toward the forest, toward the cemetery. Footprints marked the damp ground, barefoot and deliberate, stopping only at the edge of Ban Freya before disappearing into the undergrowth. No one went after him. By nightfall, Ban Freya was silent. Yet as the last lights faded from the village, a single glow appeared deep within the forest, a small, Steady flame moving slowly between the trees. An oil lamp, held at waist height, circling, watching, because the village had left. But the watcher had stayed. Chapter 14. The Man with the Lamp. Years passed. Ban Freya faded into rumor, then into cautionary tale, then into something spoken only in lowered voices. New roads cut through the province. Forests were renamed. Children grew up without knowing why their parents avoided a certain stretch of jungle after sunset. But the forest did not forget. Hunters were the first to speak. They told of a light moving slowly between the trees at night, steady, unhurried, immune to wind. At first, it was mistaken for another traveler, another lost soul wandering too far from the roads. But those who followed the light never found a person at its source. Only distance. The light always remained just ahead, close enough to be seen, never close enough to reach. Those who claimed to have seen the man described him the same way. Even when they had never spoken to one another. He was tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing that did not reflect moonlight. He carried an old oil lamp in one hand, its flame burning low and constant. Most unsettling of all, he cast no shadow. Some hunters said they heard him speak. Not loudly, not directly, just a whisper that seemed to form inside the mind rather than reach the ears. I am still watching. Those who answered never returned to the village the same. One man came back days later, his eyes unfocused, his movements slow and deliberate. He refused food, refused water, and sat for hours staring at the ground. When questioned, he only repeated a single sentence. It must not be opened. Another hunter was found standing at the forest's edge before dawn, barefoot and unmoving, his oil lamp unlit but warm to the touch. He claimed he had been helping someone all night, though he could not remember who. Villagers began to understand. The man with the lamp was not wandering. He was patrolling, tracing invisible boundaries, listening to the earth, ensuring that what lay beneath Ban Freya remained where it was. The role had not ended with the village's abandonment. It had simply lost its witnesses. And sometimes, on nights when the forest grows too quiet, when the air thickens and the ground seems to breathe, travelers swear they glimpse a second shape behind the man. Something larger. Something that stops moving the moment it is noticed. Because the lamp does not guide the lost. It marks the presence of someone who has been chosen to stay awake forever.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Grave That Was Never a Grave. In time, even the stories began to erode. Ban Freya became a gap in memory, a place people avoided without quite knowing why. Maps showed forest where a village had once stood. Children grew up hearing warnings with no explanations attached to them. Do not walk there at night. Do not follow lights in the trees. Do not answer voices that know your name. Few asked questions. Those who did rarely returned with answers. The Nameless Grave still exists. It lies deep within the restricted forest, hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and roots. Its surface forever damp, forever cold. No marker identifies it, no records acknowledge it, and yet the earth around it remains unnaturally firm, as though something beneath presses upward at all times, testing, waiting. The monks who once understood its purpose are gone, their teachings scattered, their warnings reduced to fragments of folklore. But the function of the place has not changed. Because the Nameless Grave was never meant to hold the dead. It was never a burial. It was a threshold. What lies beneath it is not a ghost in the way people imagine ghosts. It does not rage or wander or seek vengeance. It does not need to. It exists in a state between becoming and restraint, shaped by rituals meant to halt transformation without granting release. It is not imprisoned. It is contained. And containment requires attention. That is why there must always be a watcher. The caretaker understood this. The monk understood it too late. The man named Chai learned it the moment he stepped into the forest and felt the earth recognize him. None of them were chosen for strength or faith. They were chosen because they listened. The role does not end in death. It does not pass cleanly from one body to the next. It accumulates, layering presence over presence, thinning the boundary between the living and the task itself. That is why the man with the lamp has no shadow. There is no longer a single person standing there. there is only the function. If you ever find yourself lost in the forests of western Thailand, if night falls too quickly and the air grows still, you may see a light ahead of you. Steady, waiting, close enough to follow. Do not call out. Do not ask for help. Because the lamp is not there to guide you home. It is there to measure you. To listen for the way your breath changes. To feel whether you hesitate when the ground seems to shift beneath your feet. And if, in that moment, you feel an overwhelming urge to stop walking, to stand still, to stay, then the grave has already noticed you. And somewhere beneath the earth, something patient will settle back into place. Because as long as someone is watching, as long as the door remains attended, the nameless grave will remain closed. And the world above it will continue. Unaware of how close it came to being opened. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with a warning. If you ever find yourself lost, and you see a single light waiting in the forest, do not follow it. Because not every watcher is meant to guide you home. Some are only there to make sure the door stays closed. And as long as someone is listening, the nameless grave will never truly sleep.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.